Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm word of welcome to all of you on behalf of the Stellenbosch Business School, the Alumni Association of the Stellenbosch, USB Executive Development, Institute of Futures Research, and of course, Finweek. A very warm word of welcome to you as well, and thank you for your sponsoring of this occasion. This is, of course, our LeadersAngle meeting for May of this year, and we are particularly honored and proud to be able to welcome our guest speaker, Professor Reuel Khoza. I will say a bit more about Professor Khoza in a few minutes' time. Just before we do that, I would like to ask you to switch off all the cell phones. Professor Khoza is indeed a very multi-talented man. He is a thinker, a businessman, an academic, he's a public speaker, he's a change agent. He's also president of the Institute of Directors. So he's a practitioner and a theorist in the field of, in particular, African leadership. After spending most of his childhood in the Bushbuckridge area, he then, armed with an honours degree in psychology and a master's in marketing management, entered the world of marketing, but soon gravitated to management consulting. And he has been the director and or chairperson of a number of companies. At the moment, he is chairman and the major shareholder of Arca Capital, which is an investment holding with 15 investments in various industries. He's also chairman or member of the board of companies such as Hollerbrick, Nedbank Limited, Marion Roberts Cementation, the NEPAC Business Foundation, the CIC Energy Group, Protea Hospitality, NAMPAC, and Old Mutual. Now that's not enough. He is fellow and president of the Institute of Directors in South Africa. He's a member of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council. He is involved beyond the borders of Africa or of South Africa. He's a member of the Honorary International Investment Council of Nigeria, and also a member, past director, and patron of the Black Management Forum. He's received a number of awards, including the Distinguished Business Leadership Award in 2007, the BMF Thought Leadership Award, the National Energy Regulator of South Africa Chairman's Award, the Leadership and Practice Award from UNISA, Excellence in Business Management Award from Limpopo University, and the Presidential Achievers Award from the Black Management Forum. His qualifications: a BA Honours in Psychology from the University of the North, or now known as University of Limpopo, an MA in Marketing Management in Britain, University of Lancaster, a Doctorate in Engineering, Business Engineering from the University of Warwick. He is visiting professor at Rhodes and Vestec Business School, and indeed that university awarded him an honorary doctorate of law back in 2007. And we are very proud to be able to say that Professor Khoza has been a professor extraordinaire at this business school for the last number of years. In fact, a couple of years ago, Professor Khoza gave a talk at the school on African leadership, and I think many people still remember that with fond memories and have been wondering, when is Professor Khoza coming back to speak to us? Well, that day has arrived. For that we are very grateful. Professor Khoza was speaking to us this morning about what is obviously a very important topic throughout the world, not only in this country, and that is thoughts around board effectiveness, reflection on board effectiveness, in particular those factors contributing to success or failure. And during the presentation, Professor Khoza will be raising perhaps a number of sometimes uncomfortable questions, points to ponder on, almost a kind of a self-evaluation check. So we are certainly looking forward to that, Professor Khoza, and we have no doubt that, as always, we are proud and honoured to have you in our presence, and we have no doubt that you're going to give us a very well thought out, as always, theoretical and practical approach to this very important topic. For that, we thank you, and we look forward to it. Thank you.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I must thank the Professor for an introduction that perhaps is not fully deserved. Those are the kinds of things that you say about somebody who can no longer commit any sin. And I'm still alive, and I'm prone to committing sins, so you never really know. It could have actually been very, very brief. That's something to the effect am stopped. Ladies and gentlemen, may I start by commending the Unit for Corporate Governance in Africa. I believe this unit meets a very, very real need. Africa is sorely in need of leadership. Leadership in all its manifestations. Leadership generic, but in particular, leadership in the arena of corporate governance. Leadership in the arena of economic governance. Leadership also in the arena of political governance. Because all too often we flounder as a continent. And for as long as we are not tight where those aspects are concerned, for that long we will be somewhat repelling for those who would like to seriously consider us as a destination for foreign direct investment. I commend the unit also for having put together a pool of intellect which I consider very, very solid indeed. Some of the people that they have in the unit are leading leading thinkers in the Western Indian discipline. Professor Bob Garrett, I work with, and I know that he's at the cutting edge. I've also worked with Mark Modi Stewart in my past life. When we were exploring alternative sources of energy, renewable energy. So I'm not going to mention what that past life was and where I was working. Essentially because you open yourself to attack. Once I was there were no such things as blackouts. But with that as may, colleagues, we are going to reflect a little bit on this subject matter, and I think the best would be for us to engage in discussion at the end, because all too often people talk about their pet items, pet subjects, and miss the point in terms of addressing what people would in fact like to hear. So what I will do is give a thumbnail sketch that looks at the situation, contemporary situation, that actually makes it imperative for us to fully understand the dynamics of corporate governance and its place in helping us establish and nurture an environment that is conducive for us developing. And I will also reflect at the tail end about what I consider to be the role of the chairman and the kind of things that chairman should in fact be doing to steer deliberations in a board session in such a manner that it actually contributes to the strategic execution of what the company needs to do. Page down or up. Yeah. Today, boards are striving to improve in a very dynamic environment. And what are some of the elements of that dynamism? Shareholder activism and a very, very keen investor interest. Historically, shareholders just appointed boards, and because the environments were not as keenly competitive as they are, and not so prone to corruption as they are today, just left everything to the directors to actually do whatever job they could do, and all too often they delivered in minimal measure in many instances, optimally in other instances, and maximally in other instances. But they were by and large perceived to be performant. But lately, things have changed, and the environment has become a lot more complex and a lot more challenging. And as a result, shareholders have become very, very active. I've been a target of shareholder activism myself in a number of instances where shareholders actually come in and ask very, very probing questions. And for that reason, boards have to strive to improve and work in a manner that actually satisfies the prevailing challenges of the day. Investors no longer just invest and go away, they invest and get involved. We also live in an environment where the media are hypercritical, and they're actually flagging the kinds of issues that are negative And if they flag them sufficiently, that could actually have a negative impact on the performance of your share, and your shareholders are not going to be terribly happy with that. We work in an environment where employees no longer take things as they come and shudder at the appearance of some manager or director. They actually engage managers, they engage directors like frontally. Organized labor actually makes it its business to be the antithesis of organized management. As a counterpoint, they ask all manner of probing questions, and at times could actually embarrass you to a point where you might find no option but to actually give way. As a result of all of this dynamism, government, which is supposed to be representing all of their stakeholders, no longer take things as they are. They also have become very, very keen observers of what is happening out there. They regulate, they re-regulate, and in that context, you can no longer take things for granted as a board. They legislate, and they might actually legislate in a manner that is somewhat inimical to your success as a board, such as was the case when the Sarbanes-Oxley was first introduced. In fact, it went to the other extreme. It made things so stringent that, in fact, a good number of directors, or of potential directors, decided they were not going to have anything to do with directorship because that was actually painful territory. We also live in an environment where consumerism is very active. You know, consumers don't just consume anymore. They consume and they do challenge and ask pretty searching questions, as well as organize against consuming your particular service or product if, for whatever reason, you don't live up to expectations. So this is the environment where today's boards have to function. Now, what are some of the hygiene factors, i.e. necessary but not sufficient aspects of good corporate governance? I have isolated those four, there could be more. The first relates to the size of the board. There are many who have actually reflected on that and would say perhaps a minimum of 5, a minimum of 7 might actually be good. And the challenge here is too small a board may actually not be adequate to the task, but too big a board may also wind up carrying passages. You know, people who have no point of view, or if they have a point of view, never actually have, are never assertive enough to actually articulate that. Now, in the banking sector, the Maybank Commission suggested a number, like 15 or 16. 4 of the major banks would actually say, well, perhaps that's a fairly good guide. I was a director of one blue bank at one stage, and at one stage we were 23. Now 23, nice. And we demolished quite a number of mountains of biscuits. A good number of us actually hardly ever had an opportunity to really articulate a point of view that has a perspective. So I think you can actually go reach a point of diminishing returns. Now, what is the optimal number? I think it's something that you can actually debate and arrive at. But some of the practical aspects that actually guide you where that is concerned is the number of subcommittees that you actually have to populate. With the ordinary industrial organization, well, I call it ordinary, but I'm talking about industrial organization, you need a minimum of 2 subcommittees, you know, audit and perhaps remuneration. But in a bank where you have no less than 7 or 8 subcommittees, if you had, if you listen to my bank, and said, well, perhaps 15 or 16 is the optimal number, you might actually find yourself somewhat thin on populating some of the committees that you actually need to populate. A banking concern, as a matter of fact, has a number of unconventional type committees, you know, like your risk, your credit, which may not necessarily be that important elsewhere. So you wind up in a situation where you have to populate these committees with well-qualified people who who are not overly stretched. You don't want to have a good number of your directors serving on too many committees, subcommittees of the board. So you wind up with perhaps a number like 18 or 20, but the important thing is there must be a good reason for that. Degree of independence. This has been a fairly controversial issue. When is independence truly independence? The King II committee has isolated, I think, some identified something like 5 or 7 criteria of independence. Somebody who has not worked for the organization in the past, say, 3 years. Somebody who does not have a close relative working for the organization. Somebody who does not have a service level agreement with the organization, and so on and so forth. But independence ultimately is a state of mind. It is actually a matter related to somebody's integrity and standing, and how they take themselves as seriously as they could in terms of their responsibilities on the board. Now, the degree of independence has tended to be quite a controversial issue. There are those who would say that if you have been on the board for, say, 10 years, you have become so engrossed in the activities of the organization that you have lost objectivity. Now, there are those who say, in fact, if anything, you have gained depth of wisdom. And they would argue both sides fairly cogently. So ultimately, I think you actually have to put checks and balances granted, but go for the people whose integrity is such that perhaps is beyond reproach. Number of committees and meetings. Typically, the average traditional board will meet about 4 times. Banks fancy they have too many challenging issues. We meet a lot more often than that. Live companies, similarly, we fancy there are more challenges, and we meet a lot more often than that. One issue where America has been somewhat different from other countries is the separation of CEO and chair positions. The Americans see no, as a general group, see no difficulty in merging the position of CEO and chair. And I served on a few such boards. Europe, similarly, doesn't see this as too much of a vexing issue. In South Africa, we insist that the two should be separate, because you wind up, if you wind up with those two collapse into one, the chairman becomes too much of a dominant force, and it becomes self-regulatory. And the self-regulator all too often is the subject, and therefore tends to be subjective. And we would argue that the two are in fact kept separate so that there are checks and balances. The CEO has a force almost hovering over him as what psychologists would call his compunction. His pricking of conscience, not regularly saying, what about that, what about that? And we would consider that a good hygiene factor as South Africans to have in place. Now, better governance, what are some of the causal factors? Of great importance, we would like to believe that the group dynamics are very, very important. The group diversity. In putting together your board, you actually need to ask your questions, what are some of the key elements that have got to be in place? What are some of the key expertise that I would like to have in place? Certainly financial expertise, project expertise, legal expertise, and so on and so forth, need to be in place so that, I mean, you have that capacity that actually makes sure that where the financial person who may typically be a bean counter may actually have his or her blind spots reduced by somebody who sees things from a different vantage point. Second, information architecture. All too often, executives who want to hire will actually inundate you with the information, and will give you a very, very thick board pack that serves to confuse rather than to inform. So that when you come in, I mean, you can actually be sufficiently quiet so that they can actually go about their way in a dominant fashion. So the information architecture, very, very important. Make sure that the information you are given is information that you can use, is information that is actionable, it's not information that is given as a bump to give you the pretense that we are in fact working around here. Focus on substantive issues, very, very important, particularly where the chairman is concerned. You actually need to be able to decipher the essentials from the bump and focus on those in terms of what the was in the board actually grapples with once it means. I thought I could share perhaps with you board evolution in South Africa. I've, for my sins, been involved in a number of boards for close on 2.5 decades. And went through a number of changes, or observed a number of changes as one went through those. The first phase was something of a ceremonial board which exists to perform their duties perfunctorily. Some of the boards that I became a member of right at the beginning were actually essentially buddies clubs. I remember in 3 boards, in fact the first ones, you know, I got appointed on one, and got appointed on the second and on the third one, and most of the people that I worked with were the same people. And you would listen to one guy, and you had heard the other 2. But they were there. I mean, this was a nice place to be at as buddies. And as you arrive, even though you might actually be bringing in a new perspective, the so-called veterans, who refused even to retire even when their sale-by date had arrived, adopted the wiser-than-thou attitude to newcomers. What can you tell us? I mean, you just dropped out, Cham. So you'd better listen more often than not. Even as you express your opinion, the idea is to say, Cham, you still green behind the ears. Even though you actually represented a new perspective, and a perspective that they may sorely need. In many of these boards, these kinds of ceremonial boards, management has all their ducks in a row, almost in a clinical fashion. And everything is kind of well scripted. And those are the kinds of boards you should be very, very wary of. Because they come in and present very, very smoothly. There is no roughage. When in fact you need roughage, I believe, to enable your intellectual digestion. And all too often the time provided is fairly tight. The agenda is tight. The presentation has got to go through that. It leaves very, very little time for debate and engagement. And during the course of the intervening period between the boards, there's little or no communication between the CEO and the board. Perform their jobs perfunctorily. Directors perform a compliance role. They actually just love the prestige of being a director, being the dean. And resolutions that are well crafted by management, all too often are not debated exhaustively. They just essentially rubber stamped. Now this was the phase. Some of the boards are in fact still at this phase, but this is one of the areas that during my little journey I have been lucky or unlucky to be exposed to. Phase 2 would be what you might call your liberated board, free of the CEO or EXCO domination. Even in recent times, we have had the respectable institutions unduly dominated by very, very strong CEOs who effectively ride roughshod over the board. And if they are that type of authoritarian, domineering personality, they also dominate even their EXCO. So all too often, they become sort of little emperors. But all of these changed at phase 2, if you like, following the Sarbanes-Oxley which was very much a milestone in terms of changing things. The new generation CEOs now expect boards to contribute because they know that if they want to perform as lone rangers, they will in fact be prone to making all manner of mistakes, and there may be dire consequences. Directors also, even as you recruit them at this phase 2, insist on participation as a condition of acceptance. Am I going to have sufficient scope to express myself? If not, I am not going to accept the appointment. And this has, amongst others, been given impetus from scandals such as at Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, and others. And I said the Sarbanes-Oxley, may I correct, the 2007 should be 2002, sorry. Also, the capital markets, which reward and punish, began to price quality of transparency and good governance into securities. As a matter of course, markets actually factor that in. And the markets are actually forceful, they are actually powerful in the manner in which they actually force boards and companies to behave in a manner more acceptable. The third phase, or the more sophisticated board, would be what I've chosen to call the progressive board, which focuses on enduring company success beyond any CEO's reign, transcending any single market opportunity or product cycle. Now, what characterizes this? They comply meticulously with the letter of the law. But not only that, good boards also embrace the spirit. They go beyond holding down or merely complying and embrace the spirit. In other words, think beyond what the law explicitly states. Such boards also think, if you like, generationally. They focus on sustainability of the company. It is not, this phase of the board existing, but what's next and what's next after that. And they're typically effective as a team they gel. But that does not mean that they succumb to the heading instinct. In other words, if one director has said one thing, everybody kind of find ways of agreeing. Directors maintain their independence, or insist on maintaining their independence. And they engage one another over and above engaging the executive committee and the chief executive. Typically, there would be a collaborative and constructive working relationship between the boards and the CEO. But the board insists on its independence, and they confront issues per force. The board adds value at many levels without being wasteful of time. Board composition, very, very important, but more often than not, you wind up with a diversity of personalities. Some extremely knowledgeable, and because they are knowledgeable, they take it, the board forum is a forum for educating others. So they go in there and want to display virtually all of their knowledge during the board session. So that's another area where you need to be careful to make sure that board members are not wasteful. And boards at this third phase are also constructive in terms of giving feedback, and they are actually focused. Additional elements of such board: management strategy setting is diverse and enriched by directors' diverse perspectives on the external environment. What are some of the issues that directors think about outside of the board and in their existence as leading lights out there? They make sure they familiarize themselves with all of those. Legislative affairs, they're very, very current. Economic changes, they monitor trends. Global business trends that may have a bearing on what actually happens in South Africa. Knowledge of financial markets globally, as well as political dynamics. Because if you are a governor, as in corporate governance, you govern in a political economy, not just the economy. The politicians may do things to facilitate or hinder what it is that you are doing. So you better get to know. In fact, more often than not, they do hinder. So understand that, understand the dynamics, understand the leverage points. Progressive boards also take self-evaluation or evaluation seriously, and they implement what findings there may be. For quite a while, when I was serving on one financial institution, in fact, the chairman said, no, evaluation, what do you mean? We know that we're effective. So, no evaluation. In due course, they said, well, perhaps we shall self-evaluate. But now a good number of these organizations understand that you need to be evaluated by a force outside of yourself. And evaluation is critical because people really, even the ostensibly or putatively most sophisticated amongst ourselves, the most knowledgeable amongst themselves, need to understand that human nature is such that human beings, even at that highly sophisticated level, do that which is inspected as opposed to what is expected. If you know that there shall be some inspection, there shall be some monitor, you shall perform. But if there is just an expectation and nobody actually says we shall inspect, you wind up floating. It's human nature. I don't know if this was distributed amongst yourselves because I mean there's so many questions that I believe need to be asked in self-evaluation, in self-monitoring. I'll take a sample. I'm not going to go through all of the questions because they're just too extensive for comfort. One relates to, it's a subsection relating to group dynamics. The kinds of questions that you need to ask yourself: does the board consistently bring dialogue on critical topics to a clear closure with consensus? Or is dialogue somewhat fragmented and inconclusive? Do all directors freely speak their minds on key points? I mentioned the one extreme about the director who is so knowledgeable, he sees any forum as a forum for displaying his knowledge. But there are also those that are somewhat reticent and withdraw. A good chairman will actually make sure that just about everybody is given an opportunity to draw them out without being intimidated, but get them to express themselves as well. Do directors respond to each other during board meetings, particularly when they don't agree with each other? Or do directors engage in dialogue solely addressing the chief executive? Because I mean, the directors may also gang up against the chief executive. Just about any attack that is leveled at the chief executive, the rest of the colleagues join and say, well, in fact, we meant to blast you. And he's the CEO. And so on and so forth. Those have to do with group dynamics. I would suggest that I don't go exhaustively through that. I believe that copies will be made available either electronically or hard copies to those who choose to have that. The next has to do with the information architecture. I've touched on that already. Is sufficient time given for discussion in the boardroom, or are presentations scripted to the second with no time left for dialogue? Is information presented in a way that leads to useful insights that facilitate productive discussion, and so on and so forth? And then focus on substantive issues. It's very, very easy to be distracted in a board. A subject matter may arise that is so nice to discuss, and you engage on that and give it inordinate amount of times vis-a-vis other equally important or even more substantive issues. Has the board discussed succession in depth during recent meetings, or is it waiting until succession nears? I've had to coordinate succession challenges at a number of major corporations, and all too often you find yourself hit with a necessity without having actually gotten to be familiar with the succession or leadership gene pool. One of the major challenges of the board is to make sure that you're familiar with a gene pool, a leadership gene pool in the organization. And look at first year, i.e. those immediately after the coming below the chief executive, and perhaps a level below that, because there may be excellent talent bubbling under there. And all too often, boards take this as one of those things that may happen next year because the chief executive will be retiring in 5 years' time, something like that. In reality, you need to grapple with that on an ongoing basis. I felt that perhaps just very briefly reflect on the role of the chairperson as we move towards the end, so that we can actually begin to discuss a little bit. Amongst others, I felt that we need to identify those as aspects of the role of the chairperson. Chairperson should ensure that the board is well run and performs its functions effectively. All too often, chairpersons or chairmen tend to believe that they are in fact the rulers of the roost. My sense is that in fact as chairman you should consider yourself just as first amongst equals. You work a little harder, hopefully you paid a little more, but make sure that you actually accord respect to your colleagues. You are first amongst colleagues. The chairperson also, over and above just strictly governance issues, must be code for corporate leadership. Corporate leadership goes beyond governance. It has to do with understanding long-term vision, understanding strategy, in a manner that's like grapple with the issues substantively as opposed to superficially. The chairman should act as a link between the board and management. The effective chairman actually spend a fair amount of time with executives. In fact, lately, I want to believe that if you're a chairman of a substantial company, descriptives such as executive or non-executive are superfluous. You're either chairman or you're not chairman. And as chairman, you grapple with these issues even at night. A good number of them actually keep you awake. Ensures maintenance of effective relationship with key stakeholders, notably the shareholder, and in a regulated environment, the regulator. There are chairmen who actually go in to sign documents without even reading. There are chairmen who actually go and ostensibly chair organizations without visiting, if it's a production facility, visiting the plants. When I was in this company that shall remain unmentioned, I visited virtually all of the power stations and spent time with people. And I was not executive. I was not executive in this company that shall remain unmentioned. The chairman also ensures corporate sustainability, focuses on succession planning, we've already alluded to that, and oversees strategy development and planning, ensures optimal implementation. In running a meeting, good chairman will go beyond good order. They'll guard against people talking out of turn and optimize contribution. In other words, create opportunities for everybody to express themselves. They'll be more proactive, ensuring that discussion is focused on key issues and not the peripherals don't take too much time. They'll optimize contribution of diverse views, as said, including contrarian ones, drawing out the less vocal. They'll facilitate independence and interdependence. We want independent directors, very, very important. But you also want to extract synergies, hence the emphasis on interdependence. They ensure that the board is able to draw on the collective strength of all directors. And they summarize the decisions taken in a clear and unambiguous manner. You listen with intent to actually decipher the essence and articulate it to the board. Bounce it off them to make sure that you understood what it is they were in fact contributing. Good chairpersons provide a bridge between management and the board. They provide mentorship and they coach management and the CEO. I want to believe that good chairmen spend a bit of time with the CEO, but also with the reports to the CEO, with the CEO's knowledge. Because quite often, unless you do that, the CEO serves as an informant, granted, but also as a sieve that filters out that which he believes might expose him. Good chairmen will marry issues of concern to management and the board. Effective management is effective interaction outside board meetings. As a chairperson, you actually liaise with all of the directors during the course of the intervening period. You don't wait for the board meeting. This ensures that board meetings are focused on strategic challenges and do not get bogged down in operational issues. The chairperson is pivotal in ensuring distinction between a role of management and that of the board, amongst others coaxing directors and management into respecting certain boundaries without isolating the contribution each party is able to make toward achieving the company's goals. Now, for those who were somewhat unfortunate to be chairman of parastatals, what kind of traits might you have to actually integrate? The chairperson in such an organization has to be a diplomat, a psychologist, a manager, as well as a business person. Most importantly, the chairperson must be a person of integrity who is able to lead a state-owned enterprise as a sustainable business while simultaneously positioning it as a vehicle for development. That brings us to a somewhat abrupt end at the end of a longish session. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to discuss a few questions if there are.
All right.
Is there any sort of guidelines as to what size organization, if you're a growing organization, to what size you have to start implementing these type of principles? I mean, because obviously for very small organizations, you can't even have a board if there's only 10 people in the organization. But if you get to 100 or 500, at what point do you have to start? And has there been any work done on that?
What might be the minimum or optimal number at which you first have to have a board?
Yeah.
And then follow these principles?
Yeah.
I guess it depends. One of the little companies I run is my investment company. We're less than 10, but we do have a board.
But I mean, I'm not only talking about number of people, it could also be the size of investments that you administer. I mean, that might impact on the governance required.
Yes. My sense would be that, in fact, the governance requirements will be tailor-made to the requirements of the company. But I think it's a measure of governance, even in a family concern, is essential. The family needs somebody to come around to reduce their blind spots. The families fall in love with themselves. I tend to see things very subjectively and cannot see beyond. If they need to grow, they would actually add a perspective. And that perspective might just even be a consultant, family consultant, but who they take seriously and meet with from time to time to engage in serious discussion. But the kind of things we're talking about here, I've tended to concentrate a lot more on, say, listed companies or major utilities. And then you can scale down to a level where you feel that, and that sort of, from this sort of level upwards, you actually have this comprehensive.
I've got two questions. One is, how many would you, in your experience, think is a reasonable boards for an individual to serve on. And then the second one is, we get quite disturbed many times when we read in the papers of the salaries that you see executives, especially of state-owned enterprises, are earning. Is there anything you would like to say about that?
The gentleman who gave me this to use, I didn't use this. I was talking naturally. Was everybody able? Yes. Oh, okay. So the son of a preacher, I tend to shout. Two very, very important questions. What is the optimal number that anybody can serve on and still be productive? Because this issue of reaching a point of diminishing returns that I referred to earlier on is actually very real. King tried to suggest a number, but that number is arbitrary. They mentioned something like 6. If you have one, say, full-time job that is not too demanding, you can serve on 6 boards. But a lot depends on what kind of board. Certain boards are very, very daunting. The board might actually leaves you busy. So I would suggest that that should be discretionary, but let people be circumspect. The management consulting firm that I ran for about 16 years insisted that where I was concerned, I could only serve on up to 6 boards. If for whatever reason I wanted to accept a new one, I must drop one of the existing and go on like that. So 4 to 6, I would say, is somewhat optimal. At this utility that I once was associated with, we allowed senior members of the executive to actually accept a maximum of 2 board appointments outside, and the majority actually took only 1. And that tradition is still maintained. One of the senior executives, in fact, the MD, I serve with on the board of All Media PLC, and that's the only board he has outside. So for a major state-owned enterprise, you might like to be even more stringent. So 2 was what we consider to be the optimal number. Okay. Where state-owned enterprises are concerned, I think there have been major misinterpretations of what, in fact, people got paid. I can tell you what I was paid at the time of my departure. I think I was at 1.2 million as chairman. And as I tried to insinuate, I was neither non-executive nor executive. I executed certain things. Perforce. Interface with international financial institutions is something that I got myself heavily steeped in. Strategy, expansion into Africa, and all of those kinds of things I actually did in spite of it that I was non-executive. And for all of that I was paid 1.2. Now you might say 1.2 million chunk, even the president was not getting that, but I mean, these are organizations, business organizations. By the time I left, the chief executive of ESCOM was earning about 4 million. Now for a major corporation of that magnitude, where the guy has got to look after assets in excess of 150 billion, 4 million is not excessive in my humble submission. And these contemporaries in places like Anglo-American, which are smaller than ESCOM in terms of assets, and in terms of its responsibilities, because here you're talking about South Africa Incorporated, we're earning anywhere between 50% above that and double that. Those in the banks in particular, with the incentives and all of those kinds of nice things, we're earning a lot more than that, when in fact they're running smaller organizations. But when we had to make sure that in fact the things are not inordinate. Now, the misinterpretation of distortions came from the long-term incentive schemes was from that which he was earning, a certain amount, at least part of the incentive, the motivation, was banked. And after a period of 5 years, this actually matured. And so he, at the end of that period, he gets that, perhaps in the region of 12 million or 13 million, which was in fact his contribution over the period, which was earned by being off-delivery. Now the public out there looks at the 13 million and says, no, this is what was actually earned in one fell swoop. In reality, it is something that they actually saved in a pool of incentives over a period of time. I don't know what the situation is now. I've been out of there for close to 3 decades. Not 3 years. Now, where the public sector, where the private sector is concerned, it's a bit difficult because, I mean, there you have capitalists who, unless you actually pin down, will move. They're very, very mobile. And as they leave, in fact, even the share price plummets, if they were indeed major contributors. So somehow you actually have to keep them in there, but I just say within reason. Because some of the amounts are obscene. Some would say they are sinful. Yes, you actually have to weigh up demand and supply and contribution, and consider the alternative of not having a Giacomo rate, for argument's sake, as Standard Bank.
There's a question
On
there.
that executive
Okay, the back there.
You spoke about succession planning and gene pool. Succession planning on a corporate level at this point in time in major organizations are almost non-existent. How would you see the specific criteria and identify potential for succession planning to evolve? And the second part of the question is, what type of development period would you be looking at for developing individuals onto a board?
Let me start with the second, and then I'll ask you to repeat the first one because I think I understood it, but only partially. The period to groom somebody. There are individual differences. There are people who actually catch up very, very fast and can relate to the challenges at hand somewhat comprehensively. But if you are going to grow the talent, I would suggest that let people not skip critical levels as they actually develop. If they come in as a trainee manager, they should not be, even though you might actually find yourself duty bound to accelerate their development, don't over-accelerate. Make sure that they are actually cover the requisite steps in the learning. They actually get exposed to some of the challenges, such as you send them to a business school like the Stellenbosch Business School. Come and learn, because there's a lot that an institution like this actually amasses and then disseminates. So get them that kind of exposure and track them as they develop. Those with talent actually begin to shine through pretty early. But I would say, a period of 8, 12 years from entry point would be something that you should look at. Don't rush them, because if you rush them, they'll burn out like you can't believe, and that may actually be counterproductive. The first question I didn't fully.
The first question was that criteria. I think you covered some of the criteria. And identifying the potential. Yes.
What we tended to do in one of these companies that I was involved with was, as I say, potential shines through. And what you do is give them specific tasks and expose them to opportunities. Like, for instance, your senior general managers who are just a level below the directors, who would give an opportunity to come and present on whatever it is they were actually working with. They come to the board, they present to the board. So you actually make them executive director guinea pigs. So they come in there, they get exposed to the board, and the board gets exposed to them quite often. And that way you begin to see what talent there is, and those that might need to be given even greater opportunities because they are likely to be in the gene pool from which you're going to set up.
I saw questions there, then one there. Did you have a question? No, the lady over there, and then I'll come back to there.
The organization that I'm in, we had our last board meeting of the previous financial year. So we have minutes that needs to be approved in the new financial year. We're waiting on the appointment of a new board of directors. What happens in that case? I mean, can the new board approve minutes? Do we have to round robin the minutes to the old board who no longer exists?
I think ideally what one would suggest is that you have continuance accompanied by cut-offs as opposed to continuance and cut-offs. When you have a board, it does not resign en masse unless something very drastic has happened.
To the end of our 3-year period, so, being an organization where our board has to go through a minister or through an MEC, so that period is coming in, so there's the new chairperson, it is appointment of new board of directors, so completely, new board, some of the old members might have been appointed or applied for that position, so some of them might be eligible, but the decision is through the MEC's office. So I would think perhaps 60% of the board would be new.
My suggestion would be that MECs learn lessons from the private sector, where you have rotation. In other words, it could be something like a third retires and the two thirds continue. And then the next third, etc., so that there's in fact continuity. To have the majority actually retire just like that, I think maybe a little bad. I know that MECs behave somewhat differently, but there are lessons that we can learn from them, and there are lessons that I believe they can learn from us. So my sense would be that let it be rotational. But you are faced with a situation where this has happened. My sense would be that yes, the new board will perhaps have to approve or disapprove. But it will be very, very difficult because we don't quite know. So somebody from perhaps the NEC's office, it could be the director general, might have been involved to some degree or another and might provide this tenuous, somewhat fragile continuity and should actually provide link.
Over there, and then we'll come to the gentleman.
I would like your opinion, seeing that we are reflecting this model on governance, and you've mentioned the blackout pattern. So the blackout pattern that we're experiencing. From a governance perspective, what are the root causes, in your opinion, on the dilemmas that we're experiencing at the moment with
I was hoping you were not going to ask me.
I'm sorry, but we have to hear
You have to be practical. First, I was hoping you're not going to ask the question because I have been outside of that environment, and I don't want to rule from the grave. You know, once you transition into another arena and you become a ghost, you don't come back as a ghost to haunt those that are left behind. But in reality, a number of things actually happened there. We had one shareholder represented by a minister responsible for public enterprises. Now, ministers are knowledgeable people, but on things political, not much on business. So, in 1998, a year after I joined the company, we actually developed a comprehensive paper called the White Paper on Energy. And that white paper emphasized the importance of planning long term. At the time, we had surplus Muslim capacity. Blackouts were not anything that we could consider because, I mean, there was so much capacity. We had it coming out of our ears. So that white paper actually informed government in no uncertain terms that unless we start increasing the capacity at ESCOM that time, start building for capacity, we shall run out of capacity in 7 years. And 7 plus 98, 2005, 2006, that's when this thing began to rear its ugly head. Government said, yes, we hear you, but we have been advised by international advisors who said it is not healthy for ESCOM to be a monopoly. We want to create space for other utilities or other power companies to actually build capacity. So hold your horses. Don't build. And because I hail from the private sector, I said competition is fine. Let it come. And even went so far as to say, in fact, to enable competition to establish themselves, we shall set aside 30% of the existing power stations for them to buy or buy into, so that they don't come totally disadvantaged. But at the time, you will recall, one of the things that we boasted of was that we were the lowest cost producer of electricity in the world. That effectively means that if you were a private sector investor, the margins were going to be this thing. And utilities from all over the world actually came round to look, and they said, you know, with those margins, you can't do much. And I said, in order to create space, let's also go to the regulator, go to government, and tell them that instead of trailing inflation in terms of our price increases, let us in fact have price increases that are inflation plus 2%. And we justify that no end. I mean, sharpen our pencils and say, go back, sharpen your pencils again and say, that's the situation. Give us 6 plus 2% because inflation was running around 6% or something, or 5% like that. And NERSA, or what was NERSA now, which was the electricity regulator then, National Electricity Regulator then, said, no, that's unheard of. You're not going to do this because it will fuel inflation and all of these kinds of nice things. So, I mean, you actually have a tug of war here. You want to create space for others to come in, and at the same time, you want to pander to the whims of the consumer public out there. You actually have to take unpopular decisions, and they refuse them. So you wind up with a situation where you cannot create space by way of actually extending the margin so people see it as an environment in which to invest. And repeatedly, following the white paper in 1998, we reminded government about this crunch that was inevitably going to hit us. And I say, you're talking to politicians, they have a different world view. 2004, I asked for 8% increase on the price of electricity. They gave us 2%. And they don't explain, except that as an observer, you know that it was because there was an election. Now, those are some of the things that we actually had to grapple with. That's why I concluded with that little paragraph that said you have to be a psychologist, a diplomat, and all of these kinds of questions.
Right, gentlemen over here.
Professor, you mentioned self-evaluation and evaluation of the board. But you also said that the board would be measured by its stakeholders, labour, consumers, and your shareholders. Could you be more specific about the evaluation of the board?
Yes. The unit for corporate governance here, as that pool that I referred to in my introduction, with Bob Garrett as one of the professors or advisors or chairman. My sense is that the best way to evaluate is to get an outsider like Bob Garrett. Bob Garrett has the facility, and in South Africa I actually incorporated 2 people, one Philip Armstrong at one stage, and the lady called Siwende in some of the advices at this school. Your best bet is to actually have those do the systematic, call it scientific evaluation, over and above what the other stakeholders actually from time to time remind you and hit your conscience. Do a formal evaluation as comprehensive as those services that are, those aspects that I said you should actually look at, perhaps and even more. All of those looked at by an outside force that will be objective, that will actually probe, that will actually cross-person you, even as you respond, and give a formal report that you should take as a board, take very, very seriously. In one of the financial institutions that I'm associated with now, we actually got somebody from the Institute of Directors to actually come and use an instrument like a comprehensive plan to evaluate our performance. At the same time, on an ongoing basis, listen to what the environment says, i.e. organized labor, consumers, and other activists.
There's a question sent to
Yeah,
us.
so 2 days ago, I read a book that is a finance where there was a heading saying successful meetings is the meeting before the local connected meeting. In your experience, because in some instances you find that the board is used just to rubber stamp certain things. Meeting has happened that is before. In your experience, have you been exposed to such things, or have you engaged yourself in promoting you do really have to have meetings before the real so-called meeting?
I tried to cover that somewhat differently. The meetings in between board meetings, one-on-one with the various members of the board, I would strongly recommend, because that way you address issues adequately in the build-up to the board, so that the board deals mainly with critical issues. But a formal meeting before the board meeting, I think, would actually be a bit of an anathema. I don't think it would actually encourage a somewhat comprehensive meeting before the board meeting. You may have a variety, such as in our particular case, I have introduced an element that says the board comprises executive and non-executive directors. That there will be sessions where the non-executives meet on their own and can discuss the executives with no holds barred. Now, meetings like those, I believe, are essential. And those will typically be sort of an evening, you chat, you actually make sure that it's not too formalistic, and people express themselves freely. So those meetings are useful. But you have a meeting that may be replicated by the board meeting, I think would be a little counterproductive.
Any more questions? Still see a hand over there.
One of the most controversial stories that has been in the media recently is the SAPC board. You have a parliamentary committee that declares a vote of no confidence on a very new board, and you have a board that suspends the CEO. I don't know if you're familiar with what has been happening. What could have gone wrong there?
I'm not very familiar with the detail. I'm going to own up to that. Perhaps like you, I relied largely on the media, and the kinds of things that we got shown on television, the kinds of things that got written about in papers. But one of the biggest problems there is shareholder. I mentioned something about shareholder activism, which I believe is commendable. But shareholder interference, particularly if the shareholder has limited understanding of what in fact should be happening, and may be counterproductive. My sense is that here it was shareholder interference, politically motivated. And once you have something like that, I mean, you have a recipe for something explosive. And then you have portfolio committees that are also resourced by people with agendas and with favorites and people they hate with a passion on the board and stuff like that, which should not be the criteria. Having a favorite or having somebody that you hate with a passion is irrelevant. The person is, are they capable people? And what are the criteria? How were they selected to be on the board? Should be the ones in the criteria. Now, if you overlay that with politics, and lately even with pseudo-ideological considerations, i.e., do they actually believe in this or do they believe in that? Then ideologies are generally emotionally charged beliefs. So you wind up with a situation where things get confused, and I believe that was the one explanation. Now, where the firing of the chief executive is concerned, I think there may have been personal differences that should actually be inimical to running an organization properly. The personal differences should not feature. Substantive, objective differences should in fact be the ones that you consider. My sense is that the current chief executive may have rubbed some of the new leadership out in the wrong way. But he may also have underperformed in certain areas, such as losing and all of those kinds of things to do with 2010 and stuff like that, and taking this to court, taking that to court, when in fact it was actually a manifestation of his having lost it in terms of effectively preparing and nourishing a relationship. But it's a conundrum. I don't believe I have got a quick answer, but I mean, if you sat down to analyze it, you'll come up with a better understanding that might actually be helpful for them to hear.
I think we have time for one more if I look at the clock. That went hand with up first shot.
A couple of times this morning while you've been speaking, you've been talking about, you use the word as and then, the challenge between politics and business. And you use the ESCOM example and the SABC example. And it looks as if there's this continual challenge and diversity between these views, which obviously is not conducive to a unified future. How do you see that playing itself out? Because if this challenge is going to be a bit of a clash, as it appears to be in some instances, it could restrict both internal growth and the view externally. I just want to get your views on that.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important observation. What we have somewhat consistently failed to understand is that a country is not just a polity or an economy. It's a combination of the two. It's a political economy and perhaps more. And all too often we have tended to run parallel. With corporate South Africa, economic big business, running on the one track and government running on the other track. And the two should actually interweave. There have been efforts to interweave those forces over a period of time. I was a member, and hopefully am still, but we're not meeting for some reason or other. I was a member of a group called the Big Business Working Group with Government, where government would meet with us 4 times a year. And ostensibly listen to what it is we had to say about investments, about the state of the economy, about business confidence, and all of those kinds of things that actually make for a good symbiotic relationship between the government and the government. Earlier on, I think there was resonance. We actually were relating. But one of my colleagues actually observed that the current government is very good at soaking up information, taking information as a given, but very bad at accepting advice. So what I believe we need to do going into the future is to take each other into our mutual confidence and work together in a manner that is interwoven as opposed to parallel. Whether or not that is going to happen, I am not sure, but I believe it is essential that it does happen. The incoming leadership is making the right kinds of noises, but incoming leadership generally makes the right kinds of noises. So we actually have to work very, very hard. For my sins, I also serve on the Presidential Economic Advisory Panel. The President does listen to that to a very great extent. But as I say, as a leader, he's too headstrong, which is good in some instances, not so good in other instances. So he listens, and then he says, I'll think about it, and thinks about it, and deciphers and takes what it is he wants to take, without actually bouncing back the thoughts on you to make sure that you actually continue to lead into the future. I hope that there will be some improvement where that is concerned. I hope we are not going to go into the other extreme, because it's good to have an extremely brilliant president as leader. It's actually maybe a bit of a handicap to have somebody who's extremely brilliant, who walks out there when the followership is here, and distance is such that people wind up not hearing each other anymore. But the antithesis may actually be just as bad. If you have somebody who is the antithesis of extreme brilliance, I didn't mention any names. So, to answer your question, I would say that the likes of ourselves, who, if you like, we are the intelligentsia of the country. By dint of the fact that you are here, you are actually plugged into a leadership position whether or not you want it. And as a leader, you have duties. And some of the duties are to actually read the situation and call those who fancy they are our leaders to book. And all too often, we shy away, because, hey, political leader, big deal, they know something. But the reality is that they know something, we also know something else. And the best way would be for us to actually extract whatever synergies we can do. So my short response to you is, let's find ways of having the two streams actually interweave as opposed to running parallel. And it behoves us, particularly as a business school, to actually articulate these things. And I look at various students here. It makes me proud to be part of the establishment. My term as Professor Extraordinaire is coming to an end of this year. So perhaps that's why I have to be good to you.
Mr. Khoza, I'd like to say thank you. They've already said what I wanted to say in a different manner. So thank you for making time available to be with us this morning, to share your insights and wisdom over many years of serving on boards and how the board can be run effectively, and also share your wisdom in answering the questions, sometimes very probing questions about history, but also a challenge thrown to us at the end about our responsibilities as a leadership. Thank you very much for being here.